Oh, there's a lot of highlighter.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the public hearing. This hearing will include Columbus City Council's Health and Human Services, Finance, and Workforce Development Committees. I'm Councilmember Priscilla Tyson, and I'm chair of the committees. Before we begin, please be aware that this afternoon's hearing is being recorded for a rebroadcast on CTV, the Columbus Government Television Channel 3. The rebroadcast schedule is available at www.columbus.gov. I convene bi-weekly committee hearings in order to review legislation in the committees that I chair. This includes Health and Human Services, Finance, and Workforce Development Committees. The goal of the hearings is to promote transparency and provide an opportunity for city residents to learn and speak on legislation that impacts their lives. There will be occasions in which a committee is not covered because legislation is not always scheduled for each committee. The intent of each hearing is to review legislation that will be on City Council's agenda on the following 2 weeks. This afternoon, we will hear information on legislation in the Health and Human Services and the Finance Committee that will be on City Council's agenda on June and Development, June the 1st. In addition to covering the legislation in this hearing, the city's 2015 first quarter financial review will be presented. In the first segment of the hearing, I will ask Finance Director Paul Rakowski to review the city's financial position. The first quarter review will examine the projected financial condition of the city for the remainder of the year based upon a review of revenues and spending to date for all departments and offices. Before turning it over to Director Rakowski, I would like to share a few words. As I have traveled and had the opportunity to learn about what is happening in cities throughout our country, I can certainly say that Columbus is one of the best managed cities in the entire country. We continue to be the largest city in America to have a AAA bond rating from all 3 major credit rating agencies. We have streamlined the operation of our government and are on track to save more than $260 million for taxpayers by 2019. And in addition, we are on track to have set aside $75 million in our rainy day fund by the end of 2018. However, similar cities throughout this state, Columbus has experienced significant losses in revenue from the state's elimination of the estate tax and cut to the local government fund. Further, with the municipal tax reform legislation that was passed the legislature last December, we will soon have to determine how our city finances will be impacted by the new law. These budget realities demand our continued vigilance and careful management. And so with that, I will turn it over to Director Rakowski to present the first quarter review. Director Rakowski, the floor is yours.
Good evening, Chair Tyson. As you mentioned in your opening statements, the purpose of the quarterly review is that obviously each quarter the Department of Finance and Management examines the projected financial condition of the city for the remainder of the year, and we do that based upon a review of expenditures that have already occurred and then projected expenditures for the rest of the year. And we also look at revenue, though the revenue projection, as we all know, is produced and controlled by the city auditor. We look at that year to date, and then we make projections for the rest of the year for all departments and all offices. And I've mentioned in the past that although we focus on the general fund because it houses many of the most important and the major activities that are most recognizable to the citizens, such as police and fire, refuse collection, economic development, code enforcement, the review includes an analysis of all of the major operating funds, and that includes our enterprise funds, which fund the divisions over in the utilities department, our revenue funds that fund a large portion of the service department, the street construction maintenance and repair fund, the health revenue fund, the rec and parks revenue funds, our internal service funds, where we bill other city agencies for the services that we provide, and fleet and the Department of Technology, and then the Community Development Block Grant Fund, our grant that we receive from the federal government through HUD, and that funds multiple departments and divisions. And I've also mentioned in the past that the first quarter review is really the least predictive of all of the reviews that we do, unlike the third quarter review, which we've talked about as being the most important review. We have much more information at that point in time. Most contracts are in place by the third quarter review. And then we use that third quarter review to set the carryover number that I'll speak a little bit about a little bit later in the presentation for the budget, the following year's budget. So the third quarter review is probably the most important and the most predictive of all of the reviews, but it's still important to have a first quarter review. It allows us to identify early trends, whether those be positive or negative, and then it gives us appropriate time to make adjustments so that we can take care of any problems that might be out there and have enough time to really have an impact on overall spending. First table that I have up on the screen is our general fund table. We call it Table A. We are currently in a positive position in the general fund at the end of the first quarter. We project that we'll expend $809.5 million. It's $4.4 million less than the current appropriation. This really compares favorably to the first quarter of last year, of 2014. And as you know, because we've had many of these hearings, we hope to see these savings increase as the year progresses, and generally we've been able to do that. The important piece of this table is to look at that carryover number that's on the table of $29.2 million, and that the fact that all of that carryover, which could be a combination of savings in the previous year along with any revenue that comes in above the auditor's estimate, was built into the current year's budget, and all of that was built into the budget. So important to note that carryover as a part of our overall resources for the budget continues to be a very important part of putting our budget together. So having those savings and keeping those efficiencies moving forward that you mentioned are very, very important for our ability to continue services in the following year. We also have in that same table some of the other major sub-funds in the general fund. Our Economic Stabilization Fund, or the Rainy Day Fund, as you can see, we're projecting almost $70 million as an ending balance. This keeps us ahead of schedule in meeting the 2018 year-end goal of $75 million that was set jointly with Council and the Mayor. And it reflects our $2.2 million deposit that we're making in 2015. The Anticipated Expenditures Fund, as you know, we call that also the 27th pay period, a quirk of the calendar that exists because of leap years, results in an extra pay period that we have to cover, and we don't try to pay that all out in the 1 year. We save up for that and set aside funds so that we don't take a big hit in the year that is encumbered. The way that nature of the way this works is that number will be encumbered in 2016 but not paid out until 2020. And then finally, the Basic City Services Fund. As you remember, in 2012, we created this fund and seeded it with about $11 million when we knew that those cuts were coming from the state, as a way to help buffer some of those cuts and keep services moving forward. This balance that is in that fund will likely be used in the 2016 budget. I'd like to say that savings and revenue will be so great that we won't have to touch that, but that's not been the case since we put that money into the fund. $5.7 million was used in constructing this year's budget, and the last few years this has come obviously from our workers' comp rebates and savings that we have there for the good work that HR does, Human Resources does with that program. When we look at revenue in the first quarter, there's really two things to take away from the chart, and then one anomaly I want to speak to that's really not necessarily reflected in the chart but is in the review. This chart compares 2014 with the 2015 collections, and also the year-end and the 2015 projection. And the two main takeaways from this, really, and we've talked about this in the past, as you look at the very large bars on the left side of the chart, that represents the income tax, and it just shows the reliance that we have in regard to the income tax in funding our general fund activities. It is clearly the vast majority of resources, and that's why it's so important to continue to do economic development activities that grow the income tax, because we rely so heavily on the income tax, especially now that we've received all the other cuts and the loss of revenue from the revenue sharing from the state, as well as the realities of the property tax collections in the real estate market, where that has been very, very flat. One anomaly, and I'll pop out this chart, it gives a little bit more detail on some of the other sources of revenue, but as you can see, those remain largely flat from year to year. And that's been the other challenge, is that all of our other sources of revenue, they dwarf in comparison to the income tax in regard to our general fund, and they've also been very, very flat in regard to year. One anomaly is the fact that at the end of the first quarter, the income tax was up 4.5% from the previous year, but that was strictly due to a timing issue in regard to collections that the auditor was very clear to warn me about would equalize itself out over the following month. And I will say at the end of April, we are back at the 2.5% that we've been hovering around. There's been some good news that we may be slowly creeping up a little bit from that 2.5% as the auditor watches this on a day-to-day basis. I don't watch it that closely because I wouldn't sleep at night if I did. But at the end of April, we were at 2.5%. The official estimate is 3%, so we are still lagging the estimate on our most important source of revenue. So it's something we need to continue to monitor. If we look at expenditures quickly.
Paul, are you going to share a little bit more? If you go back to the previous slide, are you going to talk a little bit about why the other fund is, let's see, the 215. So all others, so we're still below in the actual, this is all of the, in the revenue, all other fund, we are still lower than even in all others. So the only ones that we're really growing in revenue are the local government fund, and we know why that's up on this one. And then the fines and penalties, and then everything else is below.
There are a couple sources of revenue, as you just stated. Local government fund is a little bit above the current estimate of the auditor. Investment earnings are up above the estimate that the auditor has. But the biggest piece of this is the EMS billings. They are up a couple $1 million, really, and that is what is saving our overall estimate in the general fund, because the hope is that even if the income tax lags a little bit, the EMS billings are up at this point in the year. That should hold for the remainder of the year. So I don't think that we'll be hopefully lowering, the auditor would lower the estimate, because that really is kind of plugging the hole of that 0.5% difference in the income tax.
What about our casino revenues?
Pardon?
What about the casino revenues?
Casino revenue, it's, as you've read in the paper, it's up a little bit, but I don't ever, I'll worry about the casino revenue when we get further into the year, because it really is cyclical in its nature. I know it's been up a little bit when we look at it compared to last year, especially here for us in our casino here in Columbus, but I think we can talk a little bit more about that at mid-year and see how we're doing at mid-year. But we are a little bit up based on where we were at last year. But that's a very quirky revenue, and we've been up before and then end up, at the end of the year not being where we would hope to have been. But we take such a conservative approach of projecting that revenue that we've been lucky. Unlike other cities, we really haven't been hurt by the fact that they're not performing in the manner in which they initially said that they would perform.
I also just want to recognize that Councilmember Jaiza Page has joined the hearing. Thank you.
In regard to expenditures, we are in a positive position in regard to expenditures as of the end of the first quarter, as I mentioned earlier, and we have really no significant deficits. There's one deficit out there that I'll talk about very quickly, but I don't see it as being significant, and it's fairly explainable, but really, we're still projecting at this point the 4.4 million, and as I said, I hope that we're able to get beyond that. These savings are coming largely from 4 departments. Public safety is the first department, and in the director's office, as you know, it's very difficult for us to project our costs in regard to our jail contract with the county for housing prisoners. So currently, we're projecting a $345,000 savings in that contract. There also are delays in filling vacancies in the director's office that are adding about $240,000 to that savings number in the director's office. Support services, there are hiring and delays there as well, and some savings in supplies and services. It's not as large of a number. It's a little over $72,000. In regard to fire, and we talked about this earlier in our meeting on Monday this week, we have savings in sworn wages and all the associated benefits. There's been a greater number of retirements than we had projected in the budget in the first quarter. That's a blessing and a curse because it saves us money in regard to personnel costs and wages for sworn. But then we sometimes end up having issues with overtime. We don't currently see that in fire right now. They're holding the line pretty well in regard to overtime. But there's an over $600,000 personnel savings. It's largely due to the fact that these retirements are above where we had projected them. Where we'll end up, it's hard to say. It may equalize itself out over the course of the year. Development, again, mainly due to vacancies. There's a savings of almost $600,000 in development across various divisions. In finance and management, again, vacancy savings of about $565,000, as well as lower than budgeted costs for our utilities, services, and facilities and management. Again, that's something that can always change, but it's a good thing to see early in the year that we can continue, hopefully, to build savings in utility services. Obviously, all the good work that council has supported within my department about building new buildings that are much more efficient, replacing aging equipment, lighting systems, heating and cooling towers, all of those things that we've been able to do through our capital budget is resulting in savings in regard to utilities, as well as the fact that we're able to get out on the open market now, and we have entered into some agreements where we've saved money in the long term in regard to our especially electricity costs. Public service, again, and I know my counterparts in the cabinet don't like to hear this, but unfilled vacancies in various divisions in public service, as well as fleet savings due to lower than budgeted fuel costs across all divisions that are heavy users of fleet and of fuel, police, fire, refuse collection. There are savings within all of those departments due to the fact that obviously the cost of diesel and unleaded have both been below what we had in the budget. Again, it's something that all it takes is one issue over in the Middle East that could change all of that, but right now we're projecting savings, and I hope that those will continue to grow as we move forward because those fuel costs do have a citywide impact, including in some of the other funds. And then elected officials, I don't want to leave out our elected officials, including city council, but there are vacancy savings in those offices as well of about $842,000. So if you look at the pie chart, this is kind of the situation that we have been in for a while. The largest portion of that pie chart is savings in personnel, largely due to delaying the filling of vacancies and hiring delays and hiring controls. As you know, both the Human Resources Department and my office approve all hires regardless of what fund those are in or what department they are in outside of the elected officials. And then you can see the jail contract and the utilities number is also broken out there, which is the other big chunk. And then supplies and services represent another chunk there, but it's largely coming from the fact that the city is very good in controlling their filling of vacant position and only filling those positions that really are the most crucial positions.
And Paul, do you see that the city will, I mean, with the 4.3 million, and of course that's the number, that's the projected cash balance right now for December of 2015. Are you projecting that these departments will continue to have these savings in their departments throughout this entire year, close to this number?
We're going to need to reach in savings at least $28 million in savings, which is a very, very tall order. You and I were speaking about this on Monday. Our carryover number that I mentioned earlier from last year into this year was largely, almost exclusively savings. There was a little over $3 million in revenue that was a part of that number, but most of it all through savings. So that's the cycle that we're in right now because of the carryover and the fact that we're using carryover to balance our budget. We're forced to really continue to hold the line on vacancies and, hope that our good work in regard to the efficiencies, the pension reforms, the healthcare reforms, energy efficiency, the CNG stations that we're building and lowering our fuel costs, that we continue to move those forward, because if we were not to have that carryover, you can imagine what cutting $30 million out of our operating budget would be like. It's a significant amount of money to cut out of the budget. So we will continue to be diligent, and hopefully by mid-year we'll have that number will be over 10 million, and then we can keep building towards the budget.
Well, I really do appreciate the work of your team, and as well as, I know it's not always easy, especially to manage these vacancies when people really want to be able to hire their individuals to be able to do the work for our residents. However, I know that with these vacancies, we've still been able to meet the demands within our community and meet their needs. So I appreciate how you've been managing this budget. Certainly want to give a thank you to the Department of Public Safety, to certainly your department for the savings, all the electeds in the Public Service Department, and I think I said Public Safety Director. So just really appreciate them being able to work through and keep their budgets, maintain their budgets, do good work, but also have these savings, because these savings are crucial, as you just mentioned, to the success of our city and the finances of our city. So I thank you for your work on this.
Oh, and I appreciate that, and I know all the other fellow directors appreciate that as well. There's only one deficit, really, that is of any significance, and that's in the police division. It's a little over $450,000. And this, we did speak about this, you and I, on our regular meeting on Monday, but they started the year with 14 more officers than we projected in the budget. So it kind of started us off in the division in a hole. We hope that retirements will catch up to that. If not, perhaps we make some adjustments further down the road and we get further into the year. But it just shows you that how when you have over 1,900 police officers, the fact that you start the year with 14 more than you expected, what an impact that can have on the budget. So we'll keep monitoring that situation. And then the last table here is just the overtime table that we include for public safety, just because obviously their overtime expenditures are larger than any other department. The really only issue here is the civilian overtime in police, and that is really, it's tied to the chronic vacancy problem that we have with communications techs that we're trying to remedy through running many more classes through and increasing the size of those classes. But it's also because there's been a lot of mandatory training associated with the civilianization of the fire alarm office, and we've talked about that for a number of years, and now we're in the process of training all those individuals. There's new positions that have been created, new classification of positions, so we're training all these new folks to be able to take over that function. So anytime we do training, we have to pull individuals in to do that training, and it creates mandatory overtime at that point. So not unexpected, but we're hoping that once we get over that hump, then we won't lose as many of those communications techs, and the need for mandated overtime to cover those losses won't be necessary. So, and with that, I'm done with the first quarter review. Look forward to seeing things continue to get better, and maybe the revenue picture pick up a little bit with the income tax as we continue to move throughout the year. So.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Page, do you have any questions? All right, thank you. All right, well, thank you for the first quarter report, and I look forward to us continuing to work together, and just appreciate the work of the administration and especially your department. And with that, let's transition into the Finance Committee hearing and the legislation. Thank you.
Okay. And I want to thank council as well, because obviously this is a team effort that we have here at the city, and it's one of the reasons that we do have our AAA rating is because of the good work that we all do together. And you've been in on the ratings calls, I know, and you've heard the rating agencies talk about how the team here at the city has been one that they have a lot of confidence in. So I do appreciate all the support I've gotten from council and from my chair too. So.
I thank you for that. I see that Bob is here, and it is. When you're on those calls and you're hearing them speak about you and the longevity of your time with the city and the work that you've been doing. Of course, Mr. Dorian, where they have such a great relationship with him, it does make a difference. Of course, you've had the mayor for 15 years or 8, and then 8 years on council, and so it does make a big difference. So, but I really appreciate those comments regarding council and us all working together. Thank you.
Okay, I'll switch gears here and try to be as succinct as I can for the finance ordinances. Ordinance 1164, 2015. In the finance department, we budget centrally for many of the memberships and the dues that we pay as a city for various organizations. So this is an annual ordinance that we do every year that we pay for out of finance. So it authorizes the expenditure of $115,000 for the dues and subscriptions for various organizations. These are national, state, and regional organizations. So we'll establish purchase orders and make the payments and to organizations such as the National League of Cities, the Ohio Municipal League, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the African American Mayors Association, Hannah News Service, the Government Finance Officers Association, Central Ohio Organization of Public Purchasers, the National Institute of Governmental Purchasing, and many other professional organizations. And obviously, as a member of these organizations, the City of Columbus receives many benefits, but they're not limited to seminars, publications, access to a nationwide pool of municipal leaders who share our challenges, concerns, and initiatives. And many of these are a great way to get new ideas or to talk to governments and other entities that are facing similar challenges and try to work through those. So that's the
I just want to say a couple words about a couple of them. I have the opportunity to be on the executive committee of the board of the National League of Cities. And certainly, I will absolutely say that by being a member and being on the executive committee of the board, to have those relationships with council members and mayors throughout this country, it's very important. To utilize the information of the National League of Cities, how that helps each of our cities, and then just those relationships to be able to know other people around the country doing similar work and to be able to share what we're doing at our city, but to hear what they're doing, it really is important to the work that we do. And I also have the opportunity to be on the board of the Ohio Municipal League and just to be able to work with all the different cities and townships in the state of Ohio and to be able to hear what they're doing and certainly and from being from a larger city to be able to hear their thoughts about a larger city and also what's going on at the State House. It's really important to have those relationships and to gain that knowledge. So it's money that is certainly well spent for us to keep growing as a city.
And the next ordinance I
That's
have,
for $115,000, all those memberships, correct?
correct.
Thank you.
And I agree that we get our value out of that, that's for sure. Next ordinance is 1288, 2015. These are one of those UTCs that may not seem that exciting, but they're very important in regard to providing the supplies, in this case, that our Department of Public Safety needs. So it's an option to establish a UTC contract for thermoplastic pavement marking materials for the Division of Traffic Management, which is the sole user. These are for the installation of markings that go on asphalt and concrete surfaces, so lane markings, the sharrows that we do for the bike lanes, all of those are done through the application of this thermoplastic pavement marking materials. This option contract will expire on December 31st, 2017, and it will have an option to renew for one additional year. We are asking for a waiver in regard to this. These types of bids have what we call numerous lines within the bid. And we had one bid that was received. We had 18 bids that we solicited, but we only received one. And this bidder did not bid items 1 through 19 or item 91. And there was a numbering error on the proposal page and a couple of other items with the bid and one item was left off that is necessary for the division over there. The sole bidder, we reapproached that bidder. They've since provided pricing for that one item, and we've been asked by the Division of Traffic and Management that we go ahead and waive the provisions of the Columbus City Code in order to include that item in the award. And as you know, we've been through this before with our UTCs. There's so many lines in here, it is not uncommon to have folks make some mistakes on a few of these lines, and then we go ahead and it's still really substantially, it's a competitively bid item, but we just have to go ahead and waive those provisions because of technicalities in the bid. So total estimated expenditure on this is $75,000 for the year. Next ordinance is 1316. Again, it's another UTC. This is the contract for liquefied petroleum gas, so propane, for use by multiple departments of the City of Columbus. This is a stickler for myself. If you remember, now that we're using propane in various operations for mowers and for golf carts, we're looking at golf carts and the like, we were in a position where we had to waive in order to get the fuel, and you and I had spoken about that, so I had them go out, make sure that now we have a bid in place so we no longer have to waive, and we have a better price in regard to doing that. So we'll have the delivery of the bulk quantities and cylinders, because then we go ahead and fill those cylinders at our facility. And this will be approximately 2 years. It'll expire on June 30th, 2017. And we'll have the option to renew for one additional year. We did open formal bids on May 7th, 2015. 13 bids were solicited. Unfortunately, we only had one bid, so we'll continue to see if we can get more folks to participate in that. And again, this establishes that contract for $1, and then as it's needed, departments and divisions will spend off of that UTC.
And we're anticipating the annual expenses to be what, around $200,000 still?
I don't have that on my sheet here, but I can find that out for you, and I'll let you know that when it's on the agenda.
So this is for Farrell Gas, right?
Yeah, and it's largely for the mower. We do a lot of use of this for propane mowers.
Okay.
And then we are looking at that again for golf carts so that we can get rid of having fueling sites at our golf courses. As you know, we've had a very significant aging infrastructure in regard to our fueling sites that now Fleet has become responsible for. So in instances when we can get away from a fueling site and get rid of it and clean up the site and go to a cleaner fuel that's easier to administer, we are, and that's what we're doing here.
I'm sure that Councilmember Page, for chairing recreation parks and, of course, the golf, our golf facilities are within her committee. I'm sure that she's happy to hear that.
Sure. 1201, 2015. This authorizes the Finance and Management Department to expend monies for labor, materials, equipment, and services in conjunction with various facility improvements at Columbus Public Health. These projects can be routine or unplanned, but are necessary to keep this facility operational, functional, and safe. The work may include any type of renovations or upgrades, such as electrical, small-scale renovation, HVAC upgrades, plumbing projects. All work will be done in accordance with relevant competitive bidding provisions of the Columbus City Code, and then funding for these expenditures is available within the Safety GO Bond Fund. As you know, we issue for both health and safety in the same voted issue, so that's why it's issued out of that Safety GO Bond Fund. This is not unlike the blanket ordinances we have in various departments, including my own department and in the safety department, for capital projects that will come up. Again, these are all, we will use the relevant provisions of the code in regard to bidding these projects. And this is a $100,000 ordinance. And again, it's for those blanket needs over at the health department. Next ordinance is 1310, 2015. This is a ordinance that authorizes the Finance and Management Director to award bids and establish a purchase order for the CNG upfitting of a F-450 truck. It's already in the possession of Fleet Management Division. Formal bids were solicited and closed on April 23rd, 2015. Almared, Inc., doing business as A1 Alternative Fuel Systems, was deemed the lowest and most responsible bidder. This F-450 is equipped by Ford with the original equipment manufacturer with all the necessary components to be dedicated CNG compressed natural gas powered vehicle. So this will allow for the EPA Ford approved installation of the approved CNG system. This approved system and installation will allow for all the factory warranties to remain intact. So we're going to go with A1 Alternative Fuel Systems, and it's $22,500 in the Fleet Capital Fund. So this just continues our work within our city's fleet to move as many vehicles that are practical and that make sense over to CNG so that we can pollute less and we can spend less on fuel, because as you know, once we get our other station open, the larger the quantity of the CNG that we pump, the lower the price that we pay for that. Next ordinance 1366, 2015. This is a ordinance that's going to amend our agreement with our limestone mining lease with Columbus Limestone, Inc. It's a subsidiary of Shelley Materials. As you know, we are on city property. We have an agreement, a lease with Shelley to allow them to mine the limestone, which then they pay us for. And they're doing this through a mining technique known as pillar and cap mining. So they're underneath the surface mining, leaving a roof underneath the soil and pillars so that we can reuse that space at a later time when they're done with the mining operation. They're very dry spaces, they're temperature controlled spaces, so there is value to doing this type of mining, because then we'll be able to, at a later date when they're finished with the mining, use this for storage purposes. Data storage is one of the big things that they do. In fact, there's a whole university, I believe, in one state that has all their buildings in one of these structures. So we had some issues with subsistence at the mining operation. We halted all the mining. It was close to the substation that's there. We worked with the Division of Electricity to look at those issues. We've corrected those issues. We brought in our own mining specialist. They brought in a specialist. We have a system in place now that will, this was basically an existing crack in the cap of the mine. That when it was exposed, it had water that came through that pulled some sand and dirt through that. They now have a system in place where they can go ahead and immediately apply an epoxy to those cracks so that we won't have that situation again. This had nothing to do with vibrations or cracks that were caused by the mining. These were existing structures that have been there for, thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of years that are just a part of the natural formation. So now that we feel more comfortable with the solution to sealing these cracks, we're going ahead and we're changing this lease agreement. We're no longer, initially we were going to mine underneath that substation, but just to keep our friends in a Division of Electricity and Director Davies so that he can sleep at night, we're not going to do that anymore, and they've agreed to go and take a different path so that we avoid going under the substation. We don't want to take, even if that chance is extremely minimal, we don't want to take any chance in having any issues at that substation. It's a very important substation. There's a belief at some point that that equipment will all have to be upgraded. It may be, that whole substation may be moved. If that's the case, we'll revisit mining that area at a later date. But so this is really, that's what this amendment does. It amends the mine plan. It puts in place that epoxy system to deal with those cracks, and then it changes the footprint so that they will no longer be able to do their mining underneath the substation.
I think I've been in that mine. I took a tour. I think Council President Ginther and I took a tour underneath in that mine, and it's pretty impressive to see what's going on there with Shelley and CLI, but I appreciate that we're now taking care of any issues that are going on with it, so thank you.
And we have all those, the seismic meters and everything has been set up. They haven't violated anything in regard to blasting or any of those issues. This really was a naturally occurring formation that they now have a solution for that our consultant agrees is a very, very sound solution. Next ordinance is 1376, 2015. This is really our final modification in regard to the Reeb School project. So it'll allow the Finance and Management Director to modify a contract on behalf of the Office of Construction Management with Thomas and Marker, who's the general contractor at the site for the Reeb Avenue building and the renovations project. And as you know, we're in the process of working with our partners in the community with the Reeb LLC and the Grody family and all the other great folks that have contributed money, the Crane family down there, to renovate the school and really turn it into a huge asset for the Southern Gateway area. There are some, we've encountered some, as we do on some projects, especially with a building of this age, that we have encountered some unknown conditions in regard to the construction piece of this that we're going to have to go ahead and add some additional money for. Those include kitchen modifications that are, we're going to have a beautiful kitchen in there that is going to supply fresh food and supply food for folks in that community. There were some changes to the kitchen, and as you know, when you talk about venting and you talk about those things, it does add expenses in regard to the modifications there. There was...
Paul, my understanding is that the kitchen is going to now be run by, is it the Middle Ohio Food Bank?
That's correct. And they came in, and because they were so willing to run that kitchen and do the things that they were going to do down there, they needed changes to the kitchen once they came into the project, and we were willing to make those changes for them. There's been unforeseen asbestos that we've encountered that we need to abate, and one of the other issues was just there were some issues with water penetration in regard to the foundation. We do not want to have those types of issues, so we're going to go ahead and make sure we correct those. There's nothing worse on a new construction project or a renovation to have issues with the foundation, so we're not going to do any of that. And then we want the building to have fiber. We're going to pull fiber to the building. DOT has been nice enough, Director Cavan, they're going to reimburse us for those costs. They had a contract. They had some issues with the way the contractor responded to the bids. They may have to rebid that. We can't wait. So we're going to go ahead and pull that fiber as well. So we're going to go ahead and add to that contract $470,000 and then $58,474,000 from the Technology Improvement Fund for the fiber. So altogether, a $528,474.05 modification that should end all of our spending down on that project and finish the project. There also is a little bit of security work we're going to help the REEB LLC with to prepare them for the challenges of running the daycare and having some of the other functions. So all of those will be taken care of through this modification. I do not anticipate that we'll be back for any additional funding on this project.
What's the anticipated opening date of this facility?
But we're hoping to have it open for the next school year. So at the end of the summer is when we're hoping to have this ready. Because the daycare has to be open at that point in time.
So by August of 15?
That's our hope, is to have it by August. The initial date was in September but now we're doing a little bit better. We've done a lot of catch-up down at that project. I think you've toured that project as well and probably have seen, and if not, we'll have to get you there. But they've made a lot of progress down on that project, so we've gained some weeks on the schedule. So yeah, we're shooting for August, but the big date was to make sure that we could have the daycare operational for the school year.
And what about the build out for all the other nonprofits that are going on? Was that part of this dollars, or did they do the build out? We do the build out and they pay for their own furniture? Is that how it works?
That's correct. And King Business Systems is donating furniture as a part of some in-kind stuff that they're doing. There's also some copiers and some data needs that are going to be done through donations, through in-kind. So I know that Jane and Tanny and the rest of the folks down there have been working very, very hard to take as much in-kind as they can from the folks that have been generous enough to give in-kind to put all of this together. But we're doing the general build out, but all the furniture and everything from the wall on out and to fill the rooms is all going to be done by the tenants.
And the last question is, do we anticipate, I know what the city's commitment is to this project, but in terms of the private sector, federal, state, and other contributions, has all the money been raised for the project?
All the money is good. The one that if folks want to contribute, they can contribute to the foundation. That's really what they're working on now, is to make sure that there's a sound foundation level there that then we will use the interest. I am on the REEB board for the LLC, that they will use the interest to help buy down the rent rates so that these are affordable for all the social service organizations that are going to be there. So that's really where their focus is now, is trying to seed that so that we have an adequate fund there that we can use the interest to help offset the operating expenses. The next is 1377, 2015. This legislation authorized the Finance and Management Director to modify contracts with Affordable Choice Electric, Continental Commercial Floors, and Thatcher Enterprises, company doing business as Fast Signs for various renovation projects at Columbus Public Health, 240 Parsons Avenue. The Affordable Choice Electric will renovate exterior lower-level parking lights for safety and energy efficiency, Continental office furniture. It's going to install some new flooring, and then Fast Signs will install new signage at the North Dorm. With Facilities Management Division advertised and solicited formal competitive bids in accordance with the relevant provisions of Chapter 329 relating to the competitive bidding for the following. And again, Affordable Choice Electric, Continental Commercial Floors, and then Thatcher Enterprises is the extension. And funding is available. This is through the Health Bond Fund. The total amount of the ordinance is $88,226.90. And that finishes finance.
committee, we have one ordinance in development, and we will have Ms. Hannah Jones.
Good afternoon, Chair Tyson, Councilmember Page. Tonight, for your consideration for June 1st, we have one ordinance. It's 1361-2015. And I would like to invite Michael Richfield, who's the president of Ohio Health Doctors Hospital, to talk about the specifics of this funding. While he's making his way up here, I'll give you a little background. This ordinance is to allocate $215,600 from the West Side Community Fund to Doctors Hospital for improvements that will better their women's health services on the west side. Once this allocation is made, it will be matched by the casino, Hollywood Casino, for a total grant amount of $431,200. This fund was established as part of the agreement with the casino when they moved to the west side to benefit the service providers on the west side. Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Can you state your name and who you represent?
Yes, I'm Michael Richfield, and I'm the president of Ohio Health Doctors Hospital. Okay, well, first of all, I thank everyone, City Council, for having the opportunity to present this proposal because we feel it's going to enhance women's health services and access to services in the greater Columbus area. Just a little about Doctors Hospital. Ohio Health Doctors Hospital is a 262-bed hospital in Lincoln Village, right on West Broad Street, and service the western part of Columbus from the east part of Hilltop all the way west to London, Ohio, and then north to Hilliard and south to Grove City. So it's a large service area, and we have a very diverse community that we serve socioeconomically and demographically, and we service a lot of at-risk patients in the area who we're the only access for health care that they have. We're also a large teaching hospital. We train a lot of medical students and residents that are pursuing physician careers, and one of our biggest programs is the Women's Health Program, where we train physicians to become obstetrician gynecologists. And because of that training mission, we have a very big women's health clinic that meets the needs of the training program, but also provides access to women who need prenatal and other outpatient women's health care. We have a big OBGYN inpatient service with almost 1,000 deliveries a year. And we have a special care unit that treats neonatal patients in conjunction with Nationwide Children's Hospital. We are very committed to improving the health of the community, and in women's health, we are currently, for example, seeking baby-friendly certification, which is a certification that gives us a structured approach to teach women to encourage breastfeeding, which is a very preventative and a very good practice for their baby's health, and also bonding techniques with their babies. The two projects we presented on behalf of this fund, one, we would like to enhance in our inpatient unit, we have something called a triage area. So for women who are preterm and may be going into labor, but they need to be observed, and also pregnant women who may have other emergent conditions that need to be observed for further treatment. We have an area in the front of our obstetrics unit that observes these women, and I like to think of it as like an emergency department in the obstetrics unit. We see about 225 to 250 visits a month for women who really need to be assessed, and is a high at-risk population. And currently, we only have a semi-private 2-bed unit to handle this increased activity. Just to show you the increase, 3 years ago we were only seeing 150 visits a month, so now it's 250. So what we'd like to do is renovate that area to better meet the needs of the women, give them more privacy, and also, we believe, have better care for the patients. So we want to expand that space, have at least 3 private rooms, and we'll need to see if we can even have more, and upgrade the nursing station that's adjacent to this area with better technology and equipment to service these patients. We also want to upgrade our patient education system, and that comes to a total of $135,000 that we are also, as part of Doctors Hospital, going to match that to the tune of $100,000 for other renovations and needs we have in the obstetrics unit. So that's the first part of the project. The second is we believe that screening mammography is a very important service, and if we can capture more breast cancer in early stages, there is a much higher survival rate for women. And at our main hospital, we have a mammography unit that screens 6,000 patients a year, and it's at 96% capacity. It's at full capacity. What we did last winter is construct a second unit north of the hospital to try to increase our capacity. And in this grant, what we are asking for is a state-of-the-art mammography machine for better throughput of patients, but also to detect cancers earlier in their staging, and especially for women who have dense breast tissue. There's something called tomographic mammography, which is a new state-of-the-art imaging that's more like think of it as a 3D imaging. And this is suggested for certain women to enhance the image. What we'd like to do is purchase this machine. They call it Tomo-Ready, meaning it has the ability to do this tomographic capability, but we're just asking for the Tomo-Ready equipment. And then Doctors Hospital, after the fact, would purchase the software, which is another $150,000. We believe that this commitment will have better access to the women of the service area we serve, and coupled with that northern mammography unit that we just opened, I think we'll have a much better access, and it'll free up a lot of slots for screening mammography. This equipment, just the Tomo-Ready mammography machine, is $296,000. As I said, Doctors Hospital, after the purchase of this through the grant, would then spend $150,000 at a later date to add the software to make it fully tomographic and provide state-of-the-art care. So those are the two proposals, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
In terms of your second item that you just discussed, so once you have the $296,000 to purchase it, but you're absolutely going to match that with the $150,000 to get the equipment?
Yes, we put that in our grant proposal to make sure that, that is a commitment.
Okay. All right, and so I think that's fine. We want to make sure that as many individuals, women that need to have mammographies and screening, certainly able to do that. I know that Ohio Health has some really nice facilities. I know at their other hospitals, I know you're part of Ohio Health, and so I'm glad that you're looking at trying to upgrade your facility to meet the growing demands of the women on the west side of Columbus. And I know that there aren't any other hospital facilities in that area. So the other one is just, I'm just kind of really interested in, you mentioned that the women in the women that are coming there, initially you had maybe 150 women, now you're seeing about 150 visits per month, and now you're seeing 250 women per month. And you mentioned that many of them are at high risk.
Yes. Yeah, sometimes people are in preterm labor or have other emergent conditions because they've had maybe a lack of prenatal care or oversight by the physician, but actually many of the preterm labor conditions are a normal course of the process that we take care of, but they need to be observed quickly, and in order to determine whether they need to be admitted to the hospital, whether they need a C-section, what other treatments are necessary to ensure the safety of the mother and the baby. And some of the patients when it's determined they're not in active labor and they're safe, they can be discharged to go home. And that's why we look at it like an emergency department to admit some patients and then send others home after careful evaluation.
All right, thank you. I think that I don't have any other questions. I think that certainly there is a need, and certainly with us at the city and focusing on making sure we're trying to reduce infant mortality and making sure that more individuals have women have an opportunity to get, of course, we want them to have, great prenatal care throughout the facilities and going to their doctors, but we also know that sometimes that even with having that, there still could be a situation where they need to be seen and have access to health care in a certain part of town. And so I think that just for the needs that we know are crucial in our community, that we want to make sure that all women have an opportunity to have the best health care available, and that you've presented this to the West Side Fund, part of the West Side Fund, and so our commitment of $215,000 is, of course, be matched by their money, as well as being leveraged with your dollars to serve the women in our community. I think that I'm glad that you submitted this grant to the fund, and certainly more women will be able to have healthy babies.
Well, again, we appreciate your looking at this opportunity and helping us, and I appreciate all the comments you made. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you.
Ms. Jones?
That's all I have this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. And this will conclude our hearing. As we've heard this afternoon, the city's financial position is strong. We will still require continued monitoring in order for us to meet our projected targets. And further, I hope that this afternoon's hearing has provided insight into how the city is contributing to local health care, as well as ongoing city operations supported by the Finance Department. As residents, these hearings are an opportunity for you to learn and to become engaged in the issues that are presented. Before I conclude, I want to thank Director Rakowski from the city's Finance Department and Hannah Jones from the Department of Development. I also want to thank Councilmember Page for joining us for this hearing, to appreciate her being here, and also City Council's Legislative Research Office, especially who I see sitting in the back is Mr. Tom Diamond, who supports these committees, who staffs Health and Human Services and Workforce Development, and Kate Bishotti, who staffs the Finance Committee. I also want to thank my staff, Nicole Harper and James Lewis, and then, of course, the hardworking team at CTV who make these hearings possible. And finally, to our residents, I wanted to say thank you for making our city the best place in the country to live, work, pray, and to raise a family. And with that, I conclude my hearing. Thank you.